All right, well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Airworthiness Webinar number 7. This was originally slated for November this year. It's been pushed back a little bit due to part 149 and some other things that were happening over the last 4 weeks. So bear with me. Please accept my apologies. I'm new to Microsoft Teams. I think it's the first time I've actually driven a webinar using this software as opposed to Zoom. So I'm still getting the hang of how to drive this. All right, as per previous, everyone's been muted. Please raise your hand using the control panel or the menu at the top of your screen, and I'll unmute you to ask a question. You can also use the chat box during the webinar, and I'll try to respond to relevant chats at various intervals. Tonight, I'll be talking about some recent events. So I'll have a brief chat about the Women's Airworthiness course, part 149, electric-powered sailplanes, and the ever-popular airworthiness aspects of recent incidents and defects reports that have been submitted. So the Women's Airworthiness course was held at Benalla from the 30th of June to the 4th of July. We had 9 attendees on the course, and we ended up with 6 ratings being issued and 1 revalidation. We will be continuing with the Women's Airworthiness course, and the next course will be at Bathurst in late June next year. One of the things we did try with respect to the Gliding Australia strategic plan was the idea of getting wider recognition of airworthiness activities via clothing. And in this case, for the women's course, we produced a hoodie. The draft of the logo is on the bottom left of the screen. I think on webinar number 5, I discussed that we were trying to work on something using the iFix sailplanes idea. And for the final print on the clothing, the rockets logo and the iFix sailplanes text was reversed. So that's the rockets across the top and the iFix sailplanes down the bottom. And we've got some course members there, and you can see the hoodies being proudly worn during the course. We'll see how that goes. We'll try again something similar next year, and maybe if it proves to be popular, widen the range available. Part 149 was approved by CASA under, sorry, I should start again. The Gliding Australia was approved by CASA for Part 149, and this came into effect on Saturday the 2nd of December. There were a large number of manuals, 18 in total, that were either updated or created from scratch in order to achieve compliance. There's still some work to be done with the Complaints, Discipline and Appeals Policy, which is Admin 0015. We had competing requirements between the National Integrity Framework imposed by Sport Integrity Australia and the Part 149 requirements imposed by CASA. So we had 2 federal bodies, both putting out requirements in ignorance of the other's requirements. So we were the only organisation so far to try and integrate both of these requirements into the one document. We've still got some work to do with CASA on that one. Also with the Part 149, there's a number of small changes that will have some impact on airworthiness. There's been some position name changes and accordingly some changes to email addresses. The way we manage changes to manuals going into the future has been altered. And the record keeping policy, we didn't have one originally, but we do have one now. I'll talk about that in a few seconds. The position names within Gliding Australia have been altered to be parallel with those in operations. So the chair of the Airworthiness Department is now the chair of the Airworthiness Panel, and the same with the deputies. The email address has changed to cap@glidingaustralia.org. The old address, the CAT address, will still work for the time being, but please update your email address books to use the CAP address in the future. The Chief Technical Officer is now the Executive Manager Airworthiness, so we've also got the Executive Manager Operations. The email address for Dennis has changed to ema@glidingaustralia.org. Again, the previous CTO address will keep on working for the time being, but please update your email address books. And the Regional Technical Officer are now Regional Managers Airworthiness, or RMAs. There's been some small changes to my role in the organisation. There's now a very clean split between what is the executive role and what is the board role. And the chair of the airworthiness panel is no longer a board member. I'm purely executive. The role is responsible for airworthiness policy. So I own MOSP3. And my role is to ensure that the airworthiness system is working and compliant with regulations. So I'm providing oversight of the function of the system. Dennis, as the Executive Manager of Airworthiness, is responsible for the implementation of the policy and is the guy in charge of the day-to-day management of the system. So if you have queries or airworthiness queries, your first port of call should be the Regional Manager Airworthiness. Their contact details are on the Gliding Australia webpage. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the contact link down the bottom. If they can't help you, try Dennis as the Executive Manager Airworthiness. And after you've exhausted those options, contact me. Particularly if it's about policy or the system is if the system is not working. We now have a change management process. We have the Management of Change Manual, Admin 0028, which was created from scratch. Under Part 149, Gliding Australia is able to make a number of changes now which do not need CASA approval first. How we work out what requires CASA approval and doesn't require CASA approval is detailed in that manual. However, if we do make changes, we will still be required to notify CASA in many cases after the event. But how we decide on proposed changes is now documented in this new manual. Please, if you want to put forward suggestions, proposals and amendments, please use the form. It's in the front of MOSP3 and many of the manuals, and submit it to the ladies in the Gliding Australia office. They will be keeping a register of all the proposals and changes, so none get lost in the works. And from there, it will get assigned to someone within the exec for processing and assessment. It's particularly useful this way if you have changes that will impact more than one panel. An example might be changes to the requirements for competition marks. Now, competition marks are listed in MOSP3, but it's really to do with sport and competitions. It's their requirement. So if there is a proposal for alterations to the rules regarding competition marks, we would have to sit down with the sports people and work it out and resolve the issue together. A couple of quick questions there. What changes to funding provided by CASA? There are no changes from funding provided to CASA at present. At the moment, CASA is underfunded for sport aviation. They have a system of dividing it out to the sports administration organisations, the SAOs. I suspect a couple of the smaller amateur sport aviation organisations have not managed to get Part 149 approval and will probably merge with RAOs, I would suggest. That might then change the funding splits. There might be a little bit more money to go around. There might not. If you want to see CASA able to give Gliding Australia more finances, you will need to start lobbying your local member, your federal member, or other federal members of parliament about the insufficient funding that CASA are getting towards administering sport aviation. And a question from Jane there. Yes, Jane, you're more than welcome to attend Bathurst. All right, back onto change management. Please use the forms. If people email me suggestions or proposals, I will be replying, hey, have a look at admin 0028 and submit the form into the office. Still more than happy to get suggestions and changes, but please, we want to use the proper process. CASA will be auditing Gliding Australia into the future, and one of the things they might ask for is, show us your register of changes and seeing if we are actually following the manual appropriately. We now have a record management policy. This is admin 0029. Previously, the policy was non-existent or unwritten, and it was pretty much basically keep everything. As we've seen in outside industry, holding personal information presents a lot of risk if you're ever hacked or you have a security breach online. Airworthiness, because of the sailplane registration, holds a lot of old personal data. Prior to 2018, people were required to provide 100 points of identification to register a sailplane in their name to be an RH. And Gliding Australia, up until very recently, was still hanging on to all this information. We're working our way through that information and deleting that old personal information that is no longer required. There are a few catches to that. Legally, we only need to keep the aircraft records for 12 months after an aircraft is written off. However, because many sailplanes are being rebuilt from wrecks, and these often take longer than 12 months to complete, we're going to be keeping the sailplane records online permanently at the present time. The other problem we tend to get is members returning to gliding after a long absence, not just 1 year, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years. It happens. A lot of the problems that have occurred with the Optus hack and things like that were from previous customers who are no longer customers of that company, but the company was holding on to that personal information. So keeping hold of old member data is a risk if we're ever hacked or have the security breach. We do need to keep old member data if they are still a registration holder. You do get quite a few members who drop out of gliding but are still the registered owner of a sailplane. And we need to keep track of that information on behalf of CASA. Deleting the old member data does present difficulties. We do get previous members returning, often after a significant period of time. And many of them will be inquiring, how do I get my airworthiness ratings back? And we'll say, what airworthiness ratings did you have? And if they haven't got a written record or a personal record of it, some of that's very difficult to get back if it's been deleted from the digital record these days. We are looking at an archive system where old information is being moved onto, say, a portable hard drive or something like that. Just admitting a few more people into the in from the lobby. So we are looking at establishing a portable hard drive or something like that, and having that as an air gap for old data. How we make that work with our existing IT system is the issue. How we make that work. All right. Moving on to electric powered sailplanes. The DI handbook for powered sailplanes was updated to revision 3 back in September. The updated sections was refueling. This was updated to reflect changes in the CAS requirements for refueling of aircraft. There were three new sections added. One was the daily inspection of electric motors. The other is the daily inspection of jet turbines. And a big thank you to Simon Hackett and Kath Conway for their contributions to the DI of electric motors. And a big thank you to David Peach for his massive help on the daily inspection of jet turbines. Now, these two sections are both generic. Please refer to the aircraft-specific flight manual for specific daily checks required by that type. We've also got a new section in there for the recharging of high voltage batteries. It's the same as refueling. There was a discussion on where to put that chapter. This is recommended advice only, and it's not mandatory. If we do end up having mandatory requirements around the recharging of high voltage batteries, that would be put into MOSP 3. The electric propulsion maintenance training, which was run by Yonka Sailplanes, was carried out in November. There was a couple of online webinars, followed by a practical training at Tokemall over the 17th to the 20th. This was a very popular course. We had 37 Gliding Australia members on the course. We had one CASA representative, which was very useful since this was the person who reviews MOSP 3. And one member from RA Oz attended the training. And for those who were there on the Friday, you'll see Darren standing in the top right-hand corner of the left-hand photo there. And he was telling me that they've already got people trying to modify their ultralights using second-hand car batteries and all sorts of things to being electric propulsion. It was a very good course. One of the features of the course was they had the electric propulsion system components laid out on the desk. You can see it on the right-hand side of the right photo there. So rather than trying to look inside an aeroplane or pull apart an aeroplane, it was very conveniently spread out on the desk where we could see it. And I am in discussion with trying to see whether it's worth getting a setup like this for future training within Gliding Australia as a training kit. Whether or not we rent that kit on demand from Yonkers or somewhere else, or whether we buy the kit outright and have it in storage somewhere for future training courses. Don't know yet, but we're working on that. Some of the outcomes from the training. Electric sailplanes are very much power by wire. If you're all familiar with the fly-by-wire concept, well, this is power by wire. In two senses of the word, the power to the motor is carried by wires, obviously, and there's a very large amount of firmware that controls the system. We need to have a bit of a rethink of how Airworthiness does training in this area. Previously, we have provided what is largely mechanical training, airframes, control systems, push rods, bearings, bell cranks, etc., cables. And to internal combustion engines. Our electrical training was largely confined to very simple 12-volt systems. In electric-powered sailplanes, we have 400-volt and a 400-volt AC electrical system. There's some very big sparks involved in that. Sparks that can hurt. There's a CAN bus, a controller area network bus, so to have all the bits of firmware talking to each other. And there's up to 4 individual sets of firmware involved. The cockpit display, the motor controller, the battery management system, and perhaps firmware in the retraction system as well. These need to cooperate together and talk to each other for the system to function. That's where the CAN bus comes in. During the training, ACE told the course that the firmware can be updated by the pilot. Now, the airworthiness panels had a meeting after that course, and one of the outcomes was the system at the moment is not particularly user-friendly for doing firmware updates at present. You need to connect the laptop to the item that you're updating the firmware on. You need to use specific software. You need to set the baud rate, etc., etc., etc. So the airworthiness panel have decided that we will set the bar at electric motor routine inspection for the updating of firmware on the electric propulsion system. And we will require a record of the firmware updates to be entered into the sailplane logbook. So early next year, we'll get an update to MOSP3 to cover this. After the course, I've since heard of a potential issue of some unexpected system behaviour if there was an update that required 2 components to have firmware updated and only one item received the update and the other item was working on the previous version of the firmware, and they had some unexpected events happen. So when this firmware comes out, and it will be using a technical note or a software bulletin, a service bulletin, there will be instructions there to update potentially more than one component, and that should all be done at the same time. The sailplane should not be tried to be operated with only one of the items updated. So I'll just go back there one slide. Okay. Now, a comment there from Jane, the Queensland Electrical Safety Act. When we had a discussion with CASA about this, if it's aircraft related, it's CASA law, it's CASA rules. So I'm pretty sure there's various state electrical safety acts, things like that, and the licensing of stuff does not cover aircraft, as far as I know at the present time. So moving on to incidents and defects, I've merged the two together. Previously, I was having incidents and defects separately. There's a couple of reasons for that, but I've tried to group things into commonality rather than having them as a calendar time frame. And sometimes by sailplane type. Now, I'm not targeting particular sailplane types here. It's just sometimes you get a run on particular aircraft. The usual caveat, it's not the purpose of an aircraft incident investigation or a defect report to apportion blame or liability. The sole objective of what we're trying to do with an investigation is to prevent the reoccurrence of the same accident or the same incident. We have a no blame culture. If it's reported, there's no punishment. Any action that we come up with as a result of an accident or incident is with the intent of preventing reoccurrence. It is not punishment. And I've already heard at least one particular time of someone claiming that they were punished as a result of an incident, and that is definitely not the case. So first off, IS-28 on the 28th of May, uncommanded release. This was an aero tow. They were 200 to 250 odd feet, resulting in an outlanding off the end of the runway. In the report, the subsequent inspection found that the release tension to be not correct. Now, my assumption here is that there was not enough over-centre, and the release was adjusted. And subsequent to that, the release was checked again and was further adjusted. So I suspect they got it just enough, and then they've gone back and tried again and put it back into the middle. The next one was a tossed G88 release in August with inadequate over-centre. This was bought brand new. It was ordered online. The release came with the factory seal still intact and an EASA Form 1. The person who purchased it did the release tests, and it failed test 1 prior to installation. We have had a number of releases come straight from TOS that have failed the over-centre test, brand new, straight out of the box. However, in order to address this with TOS, we need to send the release back intact with the seals intact to demonstrate to them that it is in fact a faulty release that came from them and that their quality control is suspect. This creates a problem because people are purchasing releases. It's taking 4 weeks to get here, and they want to go flying, and they're not going to want to wait around another 4 to 8 weeks to get a replacement release because this one's faulty, and they're adjusting it accordingly. Now, the chart on the right-hand side of the slide there is from this TOS G88 that was done in August. If you do get a brand new TOS release and it does prove to be faulty, please, if you can, send it in to Dennis and we will deal with this with TOS, because this is getting unacceptable now that their quality control's potentially flawed. Twin Aster, 4th of June, uncommanded release. This was an evaluation flight after an annual inspection. The sailplane was DI'd and a release check performed at the launch point. As the tug commenced the ground roll, the tow rope had an uncommanded release. They did further release checks on the ground and the rings pulled out with a hard pull from the ground crew. Subsequent inspection found that the release knob in the rear cockpit was trapped under the seat cushion and was applying tension to the release cable, as you can see to the photos at the bottom of the screen. Where do I go with this one? When I do a daily inspection on a 2-seat aircraft, I test the releases from both seats. It's pretty clear that the most likely cause was the DI was insufficient, and they only did the release test from the front seat. However, due care should be exercised when putting the seat cushions or the seat pan back in place after the annual inspection, and the DI for the evaluation flight should be pretty thorough. I've said before in previous webinars that the evaluation flight after annual inspection has a much higher risk of finding something not quite right compared to other flights. A Pawnee, 24th of June, uncommanded release. This was the 8th launch of the day. The rope had been reattached to the tug. Now, the tow rope, the Aerotow tow rope, had been used with a vehicle to retrieve a glider that had done a long landing down the runway. It was reconnected back to the tug, and when the tug applied full power for the next launch, it had an uncommanded release. There was a visual inspection on the release. The rope was reattached, and again, there was an uncommanded release from the tug after 5 to 10 metres of ground roll. Some further poking and prodding showed that the release cable on the tug had found its way to be routed under the tailwheel steering arm. You can see it on the photos on the right-hand side. And as right rudder was being applied to counter the yaw on takeoff power, it was pulling on the release cable and releasing the rings at the tug end. A more interesting one, Twin Aster, 29th of October. The canopy came open on a winch launch, and this was a passenger flight, so this is the first experience of gliding by someone in the front seat. The pilot in command stowed the canopy cover on the left-hand side behind the rear of the rear pilot seat. On winch launch during the initial climb, the rear canopy opened. The pilot tried to release twice and was unable to. After rotation to full climb, the pilot attempted to radio the winch driver, but did not get a response. At the top of launch, the pilot was able to release with enough height to do a normal circuit. And after they released, they were able to slow down, which enabled the pilot in command to close the canopy, but found that it could not be locked. The slipstream had sucked part of the canopy cover overboard and was preventing the proper seating of the canopy. Now, the hinges were also damaged and the canopy was misaligned, so they're really struggling there. The passenger, the first time up on a glider, assisted by twisting around in the seat and helping to hold the canopy closed, and the aircraft completed a normal landing. It was suspected that the canopy cover had prevented the proper locking of the rear canopy in the first place. It had been partially protruding from the rear of the canopy. The bit that I'm interested in is why was the pilot unable to release off the winch launch during the initial climb, and I suspect that the release had too much over centre, so I haven't heard any further details on that one. Aventus 2 CXT in September, another canopy open in flight. This aircraft was the evaluation flight after the annual inspection. It had a new anti-collision strobe fitted to the front of the canopy. The wiring to that had been routed back into the instrument panel and had been held in place with tape. During the aerotow, the pilot noticed abnormally more noise in the cockpit and saw that the canopy had lifted slightly when they released from the tug. The pilot elected to abort the flight and land. During the base turn, the canopy opened about a third of the way and the glider suddenly pitched nose down. Obviously, it was disturbing the airflow. The pilot was able to close the canopy and gain control over the pitch and landed safely. They've removed the cable and the securing tape from the strobe, and they could not replicate the issue of the canopy coming unlocked or not being able to be locked properly. So it was quite possible that the cable was either jamming or interfering with the closure of the canopy, such that the locking of the canopy was not able to be done properly. An ASH 25 in August during the annual inspection found that there was no master switch fitted. Actually, sorry, it was during a DI. Again, this is a mandatory requirement from MOSP 3. Instead, there was simply a selector switch to toggle between battery 1 and battery 2, but there was no off position. It was most likely that a second battery had been fitted in the past. And again, there's no record of this in the logbook. And that the master switch was replaced with that selector switch rather than having a selector switch in addition to the master switch. A DG500 in October with corroded air brake bearings. There's already an AN 168, which covers this. During the daily inspection, they found excessive fore and aft play on the inboard dive brake arm. And on removal, it was found that one of the bearings had disintegrated from corrosion and the other was very badly rusted. You can see the parts there laid out on the photo on the right. There's no drain in the air brake box. If water ingresses the air brake box, it's trapped in there. It will submerge the bearings of the inboard arm. In this case, there's a bit of curiosity as to what the source of the water was, whether it was from over-exuberant washing of the glider, whether it was from rain or some other source. Apparently, the club involved took great care in taping up the air brake boxes and making sure things were dry. So a bit curious on that one. But again, this is a known issue with the DG500. DG300, 3rd of September, undercarriage collapse, and this was a conversion flight, very demoralising for the pilot. They had received extensive training emphasising the lowering and locking of the undercarriage. Now the DG300 is known to be prone to having a sensitive undercarriage. After takeoff, the pilot practiced raising and lowering the undercarriage in flight several times. On downwind, the undercarriage was lowered and repeatedly checked. On landing, the undercarriage collapsed. After the event, during inspection, they found that there was a metal block sitting in the undercarriage retraction lever mechanism. Now, this metal block was installed on advice from DG to help prevent undercarriage collapses. Now, I don't know about this mod. I did have a look. I couldn't find anything listed in the technical bulletins or technical notes from DG. Anyway, this metal block had debonded and fallen off. The sad part about this is it's apparently not the first incident of this metal block debonding. This mod has been come from advice from DG. Allegedly, it's not listed in AN83. If it is of benefit, please share the knowledge. There's 5 others of these DG300s kicking around Australia. And the other bit was if it's a known failure point, it should be checked periodically. As an example, does the bond integrity of this block need to be checked every annual inspection or something like that? Making the same mistake more than once is not smart. But wait, there's more. Another DG300 in November, undercarriage collapse. This was a Silver Sea duration flight. It was a tail first landing followed by a fairly hard arrival on the main wheel, and the undercarriage collapsed, and there was resulting some damage to the undercarriage doors. On inspection, the gas strut in the undercarriage circuit was found to be, and I quote, worn out and needed replacing. Now, allegedly, the gas strut assists in lowering and raising the main wheel and provides resistance to help keep the main wheel locked when lowered. According to the comments in the incident report, the gas strut needs to be replaced every 3 years. Now, I'm not sure whether that's a calendar time or whether it's after a particular number of landings. And apparently this, according to the, just playing around with bits and pieces here. Someone's got their hand up and I'm just trying to work out how to find out who's got their hand up. Bruce has got his hand up. I'll be with you in a second, Bruce. Apparently the gas strut needs to be replaced periodically. Again, finding the same mistake over and over again is not smart. If it does need periodic replacement, whether it's by calendar time or whether it's by number of landings or something like that, then this sort of thing can be amended into AN83 or placed in the maintenance manual. Again, if this is a critical system to the undercarriage circuit, we would need to contact DG, find if there was a minimum amount of force, a go, no-go kind of acceptable range of pressure in the gas strut, and that could be checked every annual inspection or something like that. Now, Bruce has got his hand up. I'm just going to see if I can unmute you, Bruce. You might need to unmute yourself from your end, Bruce.
Righto. Can you hear me?
Yep, gotcha.
Yeah. Those gas struts are pretty much on condition. They're the same as the automotive type.
Yep.
Which means that they can fail overnight if they want to. So it may be that it's something to pay attention to in a daily inspection.
Okay, is that a failure as in loss of gas pressure?
Loss of gas pressure. The usual signs of it, as anyone will see, if they've been hit in the head by a hatchback on a car or a bonnet, you usually see oil around the seal on the strut when it starts losing pressure. So you can get a visual inspection, and if it looks like it's got a bit of oil on it, then stick the fuselage in the dolly and retract the undercarriage but we need to get some idea from DG about what sort of feel you want, what sort of force you need using spring balance on the undercarriage or something.
Yes. Again, if people can provide me some details, I'm more than happy to get Dennis to contact DG and get some kind of go no go gauge.
I don't think checking it at the annual will give you 12 months protection from that failure. That's the point.
Okay, thank you. I'm not familiar with the DG 300 myself, but again, as you'll see, there's another DG 300 undercarriage collapse coming up. So again, this type appears to be prone to it, and anything that can be done to help reduce the rate of incidence on the type would be greatly appreciated. And if you can stick your hand down, Bruce, I don't think I can do that for you. Excellent, thank you. All right. Again, the message is, if we have known failure methods that need to be checked periodically, we can put this into AN83. We can research, find the information required, and improve the situation. I don't have any further knowledge on this one. Again, an undercarriage collapse in a DG 300 variant as a normal landing and the undercarriage collapse. So half of the DG's 300s have had a reported incident in the last 4 months. It's quite possible the other 3 may have had a reported incident in the last 3 months. They have to have an incident, just haven't reported it. There is a TN that I found, a technical note from DG that adds a torsion spring to the undercarriage handle to help assist with positive locking. Whether that's of help or not, I don't know. Scott's got his hand up. Bear with me, Scott, while I play around. Okay, Scott, you might need to unmute yourself. You there, Scott? You might need to unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon on the menu bar. No, we've lost Scott there. All right. Another undercarriage failure. DG1000M back in August. This was a training flight. Now the undercarriage, this is an electric retraction undercarriage, and it was known to be intermittently sticking on retraction. They opted to leave the landing gear locked down for the flight, and the undercarriage showed the green light at all times. After landing, the undercarriage collapsed after a short ground roll. On disassembly, it was found that the undercarriage was most likely not fully down initially and was being held in place by the control rod. 3 of the 4 micro switches were either bent or broken. On disassembly, now the frame had to be cut out of the aeroplane. You can see the remnant pieces on the photo on the top right. 1 bush that helps join the axle to the fork was missing, so this allowed an asymmetric force to be applied to the undercarriage assembly, so you're getting a twisting moment when force was being applied, and that was potentially torquing it out of alignment. There were apparently 2 low-profile head bolts that go through the knee joint for the over-centre, and these were incorrect parts, and they were contacting and during retraction and extension, which was that intermittent sticking most likely. And it was considered that the unsafe green indication was caused by the micro switches being out of position. The electrification or the electric retraction of the undercarriage will make it very easy to put the wheel up and down, but it adds an extra layer of complexity to the retraction system, and certainly at the annual inspection you'll be looking at doing what I would call the functional test, probably with the fuselage inverted. You'd select wheel down and you'd make sure that you get the green light and that the undercarriage is fully down and over-centered. And then you'd retract it up and make sure that it fully retracts up. It's not just a function of putting the wheel down and making sure you get a green light. You have to inspect the assembly to make sure that it has in fact positively over-centered and is properly down, so that you're effectively verifying the alignment of the microswitches. The bottom photo there shows that the failure mode was the torsion failure of the torque bar there, where it's been cut. The weight of the aircraft is simply being held by the control rod, that was the push rod that was being applying the torque to the undercarriage. A Jantar 2B in November, a burnt headrest. Not the first time I've seen one of these. There was the first launch was aborted after they dropped a wing in a gusty condition, not uncommon for a Jantar. The pilot waited in line for a further 3 launches with the canopy locked up, and occasionally sniffed a burning smell. When the canopy was closed for launch, the smell was briefly stronger. After landing, the pilot found a large burnt patch on the headrest. This is not uncommon for sailplanes that have the canopy hinging vertically up, and you get the reflection of the sun on the inside surface of the canopy if the aircraft is orientated in a particular direction with the sun, that then focuses the reflection onto a small spot on the headrest or some other part of the glider. Headrests appear to be very common. I know from experience with a Club Labelle that happens. The solution is to avoid having the canopy up and the aircraft aligned into sun for a continuous period of time. And in this case, it would have been better to have been the pilot being out of the cockpit and having the canopy closed. Now, I know that for the Club Labelle that I was involved with, we ended up getting a one of those woven silver foil car steering wheel covers and then stitching that up into a headrest cover, and that was sufficient to prevent further combustion of the headrest. But this could have been quite nasty. Fortunately, the lamb's wool is self-extinguishing. It doesn't burn very, very easily once you take the heat source away. But if that had been something far more combustible, then you risk having a serious fire in the cockpit whilst on the ground. A Pawnee, just to mention, because it was an ASI failure, the Pawnee found on takeoff when they rotated with on aerotow with a plane on the back, that they had an ASI failure. Now, the glider released when they had sufficient height to return back and land safely, and the tow plane flew a normal circuit using known combinations of power and nose attitude, and also did a safe landing. The investigations the next morning found the insect blockage from the pitot tubing, and I've seen reports that wasps in particular need only 20 minutes to either partially or fully obscure a pitot tube with a nest. Just one thing to watch out for if you're in an area that's prone to mud wasps or similar insects that love to build mud nests in small orifices. Very hot off the press, an Arcus M on the 4th of December found an elevator bracket failure. This bracket is part of the drive for the elevator system. It also helps retain the tailplane onto the top of the fin. During the daily inspection, the pilot found there was excess lateral free play in the tailplane attachment and the elevator drive. They were subsequently de-rigged and dismantled the elevators and found that the cross tubing had failed completely. In situ, the failure looked like just like the paint was only cracked. It was not a very large gap at failure. Now, There is an EASA AD on this. It's due at 1,000 hours. That AD was issued on the 7th of December last year. The maintenance release for this aeroplane was issued on the 25th of January, and they knew about the EASA AD, and it was entered into the maintenance release. The failure was found at 946 hours, so this is a premature failure, well before the required inspection time. Now, Perth has been informed there is an airworthiness alert has been issued on this. Now, the failure is considered to be safe in that whilst the tailplane is on the aeroplane, the two pins that connect to the elevator pushrod drive down the fin retain the elevator, so the elevators are not going to separate from the aeroplane, and it's still got positive control connection. What you end up with is a bit of extra free play in the system. That extra free play may result in a slightly lower flutter speed, don't know. But at the moment, we're not looking at grounding the types. The AD from EASA applies to the Nimbus 4 and Geodiscus in addition to the Arcus. There are some flight manual and maintenance manual amendments that update the daily inspection requirements and the inspections after hard landings and the annual inspection requirements. I have since had a bit of a think about this, and I suspect that we might have a case of stress corrosion cracking. I've asked for the remnant pieces to be now sent to me. I'll have a quick look under the macro lens and see if I can see evidence that it is stress corrosion cracking, in which case the failure is based over calendar time, not flying time. So the inspection at 1,000 hours might be misleading. We'll wait and see what I can find on that one. My hypothesis is based on if you have the elevators on the hinges and you have a gap at one side or either side of this bracket without the bolts installed. And as you install the bolts, you're then pulling the elevator against the hinges, and you're ending up putting a lot of tension across this torque tube. If it does prove to be stress corrosion cracking, then the solution will be to have this in situ without bolts, and if there's a gap on one side or the other, to shim it out before putting the bolts in and tensioning the bolts up, and that should then reduce the tension on that crossbar and prevent reoccurrence. Wait and see. October 13th, a PIC 20, an aileron disconnection. This was at a sailplane competition. The aircraft had outlanded and had been retrieved via the trailer. Whilst re-rigging, the port aileron pushrod was not connected properly. The pilot did check the controls for correct movement before towing out. However, while sitting in the cockpit waiting for launch, the pilot noticed the stick was over to the left-hand side of the cockpit. So the weight of the right-hand aileron was pulling the stick across the left, and the left-hand aileron was just hanging down. The pilot asked for the ground crew to hold the ailerons while they moved the stick and found that the aileron was disconnected. Now, all sorts of questions come out of this one, particularly was there an independent control check after the rigging, and was there a positive control check during the daily inspection? Now, there's a few human factors involved in here. The person involved said that they were fatigued, they were under some stress and under some pressure to get to the grid. So my reading between the lines of the incident report here is that they rigged in the morning after briefing and then were pushing themselves to get out onto the grid in time. It's a pretty sad fact that in Australia we have on average around one aircraft a year reporting to attempt to go flying, or in fact does go flying with a control disconnected, or control becomes disconnected in flight. Now, it's most often the ailerons or air brakes for various reasons. By comparison, the British Gliding Association report that they have around 3 flights per year with control disconnections. Some of the factors involved there are that more of their sailplanes are stored in trailers, and the other one, of course, is the BGA do not mandate independent control connection checks after rigging. And this is a worldwide problem. Europe is now commencing a major safety awareness campaign. Drew McKinney is kicking off the safety seminars again next year. So you'll see a team of people visiting clubs around the States. He has secured independent funding from CASA to assist with that. And that's independent from our normal funding under a safety case. And the airworthiness contribution to those safety seminars is talking about control and airframe connections. Now, I did see a hand up earlier, but it looks like it's gone down again. All right. All right, so any questions? You can stick your hand up in or see if there's something in the chat. I've had the Q&A going on. Yeah, for Roger, he can share the photos and drawings of the undercarriage rod and retaining blocks. Yes. The DG303 was being traced to pilot error. Yeah, it was just unfortunate that we had 3 DG300 variants within 3 months, 4 months, all having a wheels up. It was one of those things that happen. Everything happens in threes, apparently. All right. Well, that's all from me at the moment. Please. Oh no, there is one. Someone's got their hand up. Stand by, Mick. Okay, Mick, you might need to unmute yourself at your end.
Yeah, just a question from the electric course. Did they talk about, you talked about firmware, did they talk about corresponding operations manual updates relating to the firmware and rolling that out as well? Given changes to engines and fuel injected engines as well, any changes to that sort of programming and software can affect performance. Did they cover that in the course?
No, this was pretty much aimed at maintenance and understanding how the system works and the maintenance requirements of it. Flight manual updates tend to come into the operations sphere. The course focused on how to perform the firmware updates. It's not necessarily straightforward, unfortunately, and there is a bit of what I would call messing around, politely call it messing around involved. There is potential that if people stuff up the firmware updates, that they will just turn whatever component into a brick, and it just won't work until the firmware issue is resolved. But there is also a very real problem that if it's a 2-part step where you have component A needs the firmware update and component B needs the corresponding firmware update, and they don't do it, then things might not go according to plan. My assumption, and I'll list it as an assumption, is that if there is a firmware update that does require maintenance manual or flight manual update, that will be included in the technical note that issues that firmware update. And for the people on the course, they'll all remember me saying that this is very much version 1.0. They have the system working to a state that is compliant with the standards. However, some of that compliance doesn't revolve around user friendliness. So there's a few things that may be implemented in the future to improve that, like the firmware in the cockpit display unit could be updated with a simple USB port, a la what you see these days in Varios and flight computers and FLARMs. You plug the USB memory stick in and hey presto, your firmware is updated. That's not the case at the moment. You need to get to the back of the instrument, plug in the laptop, set the baud rate, use the right bit of software and have the correct file. Bear with me, Andy. Andy, you might need to unmute yourself at your end.
It's just a follow-up on the Arcus tailplane fitting.
Yes.
Yeah, I've noticed quite a lot of very poor adjustments of this glider in particular. I've noticed very severe play in this part on 2 separate occasions.
Okay, adjustments in which way? Adjustments in just free play of the control system, or adjustments with the fit of the elevators up against the bracket?
This component is fleet wide. So this is not just Nimbus, Duo, or Arcus. This is every Shemp glider has the same system. So where this is broken is around the adjustable sleeve that is onto the elevator drive pins.
Mm-hmm.
And this is got a section in the maintenance manual of each glider of how to adjust it. But on this, if you check for play up and down on the tips of the tailplane, it will show play in that component and that fitting.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, at that pin adjustment setting in this U bracket, this Arcus had quite severe play on 2 separate occasions of just walking past and having a little wobble for me to notice it. So it can be adjusted too tight or too loose, and over time that play can then cause other problems. So a fatigue issue, yes, but I think a lot of this would be down to an adjustment issue, and maybe that this is something that we need to maybe it's something that needs to be a bit more widely educated versus of how to check for the correct adjustment.
Well, this is what ANs are for. So if we can get the advice to Dennis, we can draft up an AN and get it out to people. I've only seen that particular photo effectively. The cracks always grow across the tension field. So
Yes.
I was just trying to imagine in my head, looking from the photo, how you would get tension going perpendicular across the torque tube like that.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. You're babysitting, are you? All right, we'll let Andy attend to more pressing matters. All right, any other questions or comments? Just go back to chat.
Anthony?
Yes.
I would suggest that in the short term, I'd reduce the inspection interval to 500 hours.
Yeah, we get a bit interesting here. EASA is the airworthiness authority from the country of origin. They trump everybody. So the EASA AD requires this at 1,000 hours. Difficult to trump that with the way the airworthiness system works.
We won't have a problem. We won't have a problem with going for a shorter interval. We'll only have a problem going for a longer one. I think we can find, from the point of view in the short term, because we've found this service difficulty, we've put it back to the menu, back to EASA. In the meantime, 500 hours looks like being a
reasonable
a sensible approach from the point of view of GFA's liability.
Yes, the Airworthiness Authority that was issued, again, this was recommended immediate inspection. Now, whether or not people do that, different question, but I'll work on that with Dennis over the next couple of days.
Have fun.
Oh, always fun. But I want to understand the mechanism, because if it was stress corrosion cracking, hours doesn't flying hours doesn't make any difference. It's calendar hours.
I would check. I would also test the material, because there may have been an in-production material substitution which has got a high crack propagation. It may be different heat treatment.
Yes.
It may be that the aircraft is set up with the elevator cold and then parked in the hot sun. And the differential expansion may be doing it.
I
so
understand that. I understand that one. Again, it was more likely that it was set up in a warm climate, and when it chills down, it tries to contract, and it can't. The ends are being restrained, and it pulls itself apart that way.
Yeah, it's the the steel doesn't fatigue in compression.
Yeah.
So it would have to be, if it's done that, then it will have cracked on the tension side of the bending.
Yes. Well, I don't think it. I don't necessarily think it's a bending problem. But again, the cracks always grow across the tension. Finding out what the source of the tension is the issue.
I'll do a hardness test, and as was just suggested, a conductivity test is probably worth a look. The hardness test will tell you what the heat treat status is.
Yeah. We'll work on it. Anybody else? Well, thank you everyone for attending. Hopefully, I would like to wish you a really good Christmas and some very happy soaring over the summer period. And I'll look forward to doing another one of these April-May timeframe. Good night. Have a great Christmas.